I know there was a moment like you were studying psychology and studying to become a psychotherapist. And at some point you learned about solution focused brief therapy. Was that like this light bulb just going off for you?
100%. Like when you go to graduate school, which I didn't know, I went to graduate school to learn how to be a psychotherapist. And I thought that's what they were going to teach me. And when I got to graduate school, I learned that there's like hundreds of theories that are different ways you can do the job of psychotherapy. And I was really frustrated because it's just like throwing these theories at me. I was like, so how do I do the job given all of this stuff you're throwing at me? You know, I felt a little bit like I was over my head in graduate school. Like there are all these super smart people reading all this super smart stuff, and none of it was really making a ton of sense to me. And then in one class, there was a book that had 2 pages in it about solution-focused brief therapy. And it was the first time in my grad experience where I read these 2 pages and I instantly understood what the author was saying about what the professional in those 2 pages was supposed to be doing. And I was like, since I understand this, like you said, it was like this lightning crash moment. Like, this is what I need to be learning because I understand it. And I started going super duper deep into it. It literally changed everything for me.
The first thing we were talking about, most people are not asking themselves useful questions, like the why me question. It seems like the why me question, you're just giving up all agency in your life when you start to ask that question. Lots of things go wrong in my life, but especially in business, because we've got a great big team. Something's always got to be going wrong, right? And someone always going to be struggling. We've got lots of clients. And we just had something that I just discovered last night that was a pretty significant tech issue that something just stopped working. And I think, like, not to pat myself on the back too much, but for me, I'm like, I don't want to figure out blame or who did it. Or I'm just like, forward. That's my motto. It's forward. What are we going to do now? How are we going to turn this into a positive? And I remember one time I was on Necker Island, which is like Richard Branson's private island. And I was on there and I got to spend some time with the manager of the island. And they had this horrific fire that just burned down the main building. They burned down all their communication system. This is, a decade or more ago. Incredible fire that burned everything down. And Branson was not on the island when this happened. And so he returns like the next morning to the island. And what the manager said to him, the first thing he said to him was, how soon can we get the architect here so we can start redesigning this? It wasn't like, whose fault was this? Why did this happen? It was just like, forward. Let's get the guy here and start working on this.
That's such a powerful thing. And to be honest with you, it's why I wrote this book. Like Chris said earlier, this is my 6th. My 5 previous are professional books. But I've spent a lot of time around super successful people, both in the world of business, more recently in the world of entertainment. Prior to that, I spent 20 or nearly 20 years around clients and watching them go from like real significant challenges to overcoming them. And one of the traits all of these people share is an ability to focus on an outcome, which is my clinical way of saying on moving forward. There is something about, as you were just saying, Richard Branson's brain or that manager's brain that made them say, how soon can we get the architect here? They didn't say, I need 48 hours to mourn the loss of the stuff that burned down. They said, how soon can we keep moving? And there is something about when people are successful, their minds are not the same as when they're riddled with problems. And in the early days of my work, I actually thought that was a trait that like a person had or didn't have. So in essence, there was a trait that made people successful. And if you didn't have that trait, it was just harder for you to be successful. Until I realized that's actually not true. That trait is like a trainable muscle. That trait is like a skill that you can actually start to deploy and build. And when you do, your life immediately becomes different. And that, for me, is what like made me sit down with my buddy Adam and say, like, I got to get this out on paper so that more people can get access to this information. Because they look at like a Richard Branson and they're like, oh, he must be good at money. He must be good with business. He must be good with, ideas. And all of that might be true. But I can definitely tell you the primary thing that successful people have mastered before all of that is mindset.
Your answer there, what you just said is one of the most hopeful, positive things that I've ever heard for humanity. That you can go from someone who was, why did this happen to me? And you can train a muscle to be like, what do I do next? How can I get out of this? How can I change the circumstance?
That is absolutely true. 100% true. And when I realized that, I was already on fire to help people, but I got to help. Like, people need to understand that success is a skill just like marathon running. And no one is really born a marathon runner. They have to like develop that skill over the course of time and hard work. Well, mindset is also a skill. Mindset is also something you can hone and train. And life is so, and I tell people this, and they always are surprised when I say it this way, but this is the only way I know how to say this. Life is horrible. There are tragic things that are going to happen all the time. There are things that you can't control that are going to go wrong. As Jeff just alluded to, like when you run a business, something is going to break no matter how good you are at running business. Like life is a series of punches in the nose. Like there's nothing we can do about that. And I think most people talk about like not useful questions. Most people try to figure out, how do I make my life easier? And I've come to the point where it's like, no. I want you to accept that life is hard. Life is climbing Mount Everest. Life is running a marathon. Life is like, it's hard. What you should be asking yourself is, how do I develop the skills and strength to thrive amongst the hard? And one of the ways to do that is to develop that Richard Branson type skill, that the skill that manager demonstrated in that moment. Like there's nothing he can do. Things are going to catch on fire and burn down. But he's in charge of what he asks himself. And the first question he asks is, how soon can we get the architect here? Versus, who's at fault to this? Who screwed this up? They're just two completely different mindsets and lead to two completely different life outcomes. And as I just said, life is hard. When you develop this mindset, this is the only way to make life smoother. And Jeff, I heard you tell a story one time, and I was sitting in the seat like, that's it. And you talked about when you're skiing, the best way to avoid the trees is actually not to pay attention to the trees. The best way when you're skiing is to pay attention to the path. And if you pay attention to the path, you're significantly less likely to hit the trees. Well, life is that same way. And we all know people that for whatever reason, they just pay attention to the trees in their life. Well, you're more likely to hit more of them. So thus you're making your life, which is already hard, you're making it harder. But if you pay attention to the path, or as I say clinically, the outcome, your life gets easier because you're dodging more trees. In fact, you don't even notice them.
Hey, Launch family, one more thing before you go. If you haven't yet, go to getyoulaunch.com. We have some absolutely free, awesome launch training for you. I think you'll really dig it. And it also is free. So why not go check it out? Go to getyoulaunch.com and we will send you out some really cool stuff. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.